Welcome to the Discovery Pod, where we talk to leading experts from the University of Adelaide about solutions to society's most pressing challenges. Transitioning to green energy will require us to mine more resources than we have ever mined in history. How will we do this sustainably? Discussing this topic is Professor Michael Goodsite, environmental engineer and director at the Institute for Mineral and Energy Resources, and Tom Payten, who is undertaking a PhD to develop mineral-specific sensors that identify damaging or valuable minerals. So Michael, if we begin at the basics, how do we currently mine copper in Australia?
Well, sure. Well, copper is mined in a couple of different ways in Australia and around the world. There are large open pit mines that I'm sure people have in their mind that you take the copper directly from ore that you mine and you get deeper and deeper as you go along. There are mines that go underground that people might know and might think about from those video games that some of the kids play when they're kind of mining materials, and they go deeper and deeper underground and follow the copper kind of a way. And then there's another way where you're taking the copper out of the ground from putting tubes into the ground and putting down a liquid that helps liquefy the copper, and then you suck the liquid up to the ground, and in that way you're doing in place recovery, or in situ leaching it's called, and you're mining the mineral copper rather than rock or the ore. Now in Australia, we're really lucky in this country to have about the second largest amount of known resources in the world for copper, right after Chile. But we're currently at about fifth in the world production-wise. Most copper is actually mined underground. And in South Australia, we have one of the largest underground copper mines in the world at Olympic Dam. Another large copper mine in Australia is around Mount Isa. So you see all three types of copper mining in Australia, but mostly it's done underground and in our country here.
Right, okay. And we all know that mining is somewhat of a controversial topic. Are all of these processes bad or good or for the environment, or are some of them worse for the environment than others?
Well, I think that's a great question. All of us as humans impact the environment the day we enter Earth. And I was just talking to my own family about how when I was a kid, the population of the Earth was half of what it is now. And so if you think about mining and what's been done through humanity, firstly, copper was the first metal humans mined. And they did it because they found out that copper had a lot of uses, and it's still that way. Copper has lots of uses, and it's all around us. A normal vehicle has about 20 kilos of copper in it, whereas an electric vehicle can have lots more copper. A windmill, for example, can have 4 tons of copper in it. So we need it, and the question is that you asked, are all the ways we get to it sustainable? And I think businesses recognize they have to become more sustainable. They've made promises to do so, and the world expects it of them, not just their investors, but all of us. And I think that if you look at how we mined in the past, that it's not the way we're going to mine in the future. And businesses are doing a lot to learn how to get to the amount of copper we need, because we need a lot of copper and other materials without producing the waste that we see produced. And if you see mines, you see piles of rocks around. That's referred to in mining as tailings. 46% of the world's tailings are from copper mining. So the question is, how do we turn tailings into a resource instead of a waste? How do we use less water, less energy? And I think that there's lots of example of Australian universities and companies trying to lead the way, because we can't move forward as a society without it at the growth rates we're seeing. There's a gap, and we have to address it. but are we doing it as sustainably as we could be doing it yet? I think there's lots of room for improvement, and we're happy to help companies improve.
Right. So in essence, if we want to see the Sustainable Development Goals achieved, we need more copper, and we're going to have to access it in some way. And the question is now, how do we do that in a more sustainable way?
Well, exactly, because, you know, copper has always been recycled, and it's still being recycled. But the issue is that generally, globally, less than 20% of copper we're going to be able to recycle again, because most copper we use is tied up in buildings and infrastructure, and we can't just simply recycle that so easily. And even if we could, what do we do with all the other materials and not impact the environment as much? So it's a complicated issue, and copper is just one of the materials or metals we need, but it's an important one for Australia, and it's a key one to electrify society or to modernize our energy systems, which is the focus of the research institute I'm honored to lead.
Right. So just to really take it back to basics, we need copper to electrify because we need copper wires, things like that take energy from our renewable energy sources like wind farms, solar panels, to actually take it to our light bulbs or to
exactly, and to even build the windmill with. As I mentioned before, it's some windmills have 4 tons of copper in them in their motors. Solar panels have copper in them. And you need the transmission wires, all that infrastructure. And then to use electric cars that use even more copper than normal cars.
Right.
And so it's part of the equation. I think the good news is the copper's there. Because in any productive mine, we're only mining the very tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And the rest of the copper we have not used, and when I say we, humanity through the mining companies have not accessed, because there's a premium they pay on the environment with more water and more energy. And so I think that as we explore ways to get to that copper and address the paradigm of using less water and less energy, we'll be able to get the copper we need. And I guess another great strength of Australia is its ability to find copper, exploring and using techniques that you see even being developed and used in space to find new copper sources. That's super exciting, but to develop copper new mines requires globally on average 16 years.
Okay.
And to put it in perspective, a lot of scientists have said that for us to reach our sustainable development goals by 2050 and the commitments we've made to one another through electrifying society, we'll have to mine more copper in the next 30 years than we have mined in the history of humanity.
Wow, that's huge.
It is huge. And, you know, the good news is we know it's there. The challenge for us all is to get to it sustainably.
Totally, yeah. So we'll later discuss a lot of those ways to get to it sustainably. Tom, before we do that, can you describe your PhD for us?
Yeah, sure. So in our research group, we're working on using lasers in a really interesting way. And we're targeting minerals that either damage the environment or minerals that are valuable, with an aim to provide real-time sensors so that we can see the things that we're extracting out of the ground either before we bring them out of the ground or before we put them through a processing plant. And the objective there is really to help address some of these concerns that Mike's raised, so that we can reject waste rock before we go through all of the energy-intensive processes of crushing it and then converting it into tailings. If we can reject it earlier, then we can put it back in the ground much easier, or it can be converted into a construction material. And also, if we can identify harmful minerals and the elements that cause damage to the environment, then we can help address some of this supply of copper, because some of the copper in the ground we can't mine at the moment because it's associated with damaging elements.
Right.
And if we dig that out of the ground and process it as is, it's going to cause too much damage to the environment, and just we can't access it. Whereas if we can identify those minerals and identify where they are, then we have the potential to remove them from the processing stream and access that copper that's locked up that we can't get to at the moment.
So it's kind of like mining quality over quantity and what you
Yeah,
need.
so it comes down into what they're calling selective mining or ore sorting. So selective mining is where you target the things that you want to get and you leave behind the things that you're not interested in. And ore sorting is where you intervene before you use all this energy, and you reject the waste material so
Amazing.
that you don't waste energy, you don't generate waste, you use less water.
Do you have an example that some of the listeners might be able to relate to?
Yeah, so at the moment our research group is prototyping a sensor that detects fluorine-bearing minerals, and fluorine is a big concern for a lot of copper products because when it goes through a smelter where you generate the copper metal, fluorine gets liberated into the environment and causes a lot of damage. So we are developing right here in Adelaide a prototype sensor that's a cross-belt sensor, so a couple of meters in size, that will help identify the fluorine minerals so that we can reject high fluorine material and just not process it to begin with.
Fantastic. That sounds so relevant and so helpful. Yeah. Michael, what are some other ways we can improve our mining practices to become more sustainable, just in general terms?
Well, there's some research that was done by a fantastic group on the East Coast, Professor Deanna Kemp and her colleagues at another university, and she pointed to the fact that a lot of copper mines are in remote areas, and a lot of copper mines are challenged in dealing with social issues and social license around the people around them, and so I think that some of the things we can do in general are one, be better to interact with the societies around where we mine and listen to them and their ideas. Have a plan to close our mines more efficiently and maybe use them for other purposes where that's appropriate. And you see some examples of that in Australia where there's a mine that's going to be used for a hydroelectric power plant. In Denmark, where I moved here from, where you take mines that were giving building materials and turn them into lakes. And that improves biodiversity, and people want to live around lakes. And so that requires commitment and long-term thinking through the entire mining cycle. Most of our environmental footprint is spread throughout the mining process, from opening a mine to closing it, but most of our carbon footprint is through the energy and water we use in processing the rock, getting to the copper or whatever other material we need. And so we have to think holistically, and we have to address new and improved processing issues, and lots of exciting research going on in Australia and in South Australia, working with our friends at the University of South Australia, doing fantastic things in processing, and the group that Tom's with, just thinking outside of the box. And I think that what's important as well is we have to listen to all the good ideas. Professors don't have all of them. Our students don't have all of them. And it's about getting out and listening to people, and also being conscious that what we use has a cost for all of us. All of our buildings, all of our gadgets, our technologies. And so to be conscious of that as we develop society, to think in circular economy and other efforts to really consciously minimize impact.
Absolutely. Tom, do you think that Australia plays a particularly important role in mining something like copper?
Absolutely. Australia has a reputation as one of the leading countries in terms of mining practice and technology. And we have an obligation to maintain that and to make sure that we can improve our processes and demonstrate that we can do this. We're perfectly placed to do it, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. There's no reason why we couldn't. So we absolutely should.
Michael, are there particular reasons Australia is particularly plays a particularly important role?
Yes, well, as I mentioned, we're the 5th largest producer right now in the world, so and have the 2nd largest resource, and we have Australians, and Australians want us to do it as best as possible, not only for themselves but for the future of their children and the future generations beyond. Australia has a very credible position in both the industrial and geopolitical landscape of doing the right thing. And I know there's lots of opinions about that, but when you look at how things could be mined, I've seen the efforts here really driven towards improving the situation for all of us. And I see genuine commitments to do better, and I see the willingness to call out fault when faults happened. And that's difficult for businesses to do. And people aren't perfect, businesses aren't perfect, but it's encouraging to see that when something that's wrong has happened, there's the responsibility, in my opinion, has been taken, and we move on. And that, I think, is something that you wouldn't see everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. So we've talked a little bit about recycling copper. Is there anywhere else we can acquire copper other than recycling or taking it from the ground?
Sure. Well,
any creative ideas?
well, together with a group at Adelaide University, we published a paper I thought was a lot of fun to publish about getting the minerals we need from space and from asteroids. And I think that is such a cool idea. Tom and his group has technology that can be used for it. They've even built like one of these little mini CubeSats, and I think it is so interesting. And people say to me, well, let's fix Earth first and then go to space. And I get that, but it's also there. And one asteroid could have as much copper as we need, full stop.
Wow.
So if we could bring it back in a sustainable manner, that would actually help our planet.
How do you bring it back?
Well, I don't think we've solved that yet.
A small piece in the puzzle.
But the interesting thing is you know, and really kind of interesting coffee chat is a lot of our economies are based on commodities like gold or silver. What would happen to the global economy if somebody brought back an asteroid that contains more gold in it than the entire global economy presently has? What would happen to our economies?
Chaos.
I don't know if it would be chaos. It would certainly be, I think it would be, you'd have to think about it in, you know, in economic terms before you actually did it. And similarly, in Australia, a lot of our economic growth and prosperity and well-stand is based on the natural resources we have in the minerals. And so what if we brought back an asteroid and you didn't need Australian mining? It's something that it is creative, but we really have to think through, not just for environmental and ethical reasons, but for the unintended consequences we might have on our own society. If somebody says, great, we've got all the iron we need now, we have all the copper, we have all the gold, we don't need you anymore. I think with an economy where now hydrogen's becoming part of the modern energy system and more solar, that there's an opportunity to convert this. And I think that the talk about space challenges us to have that conversation because our Earth's resources are finite. So at some point, people aren't going to need us. And so we're going to need to figure out what are we going to do instead.
Absolutely. And Tom, how does your work relate to this space exploration topic?
So I think one of the really, really important things to understand with space resource exploration and utilisation is that all our efforts that we put into this are going to benefit us down on Earth. Because when we talk about space exploration and resource utilisation, we're talking about building better sensors so that we can process material where there's no water, and so that we can target very specifically the things that we need because we can't send people out there to look around, and so that we can automate our processes so that we can do it all without having to have people there. And these are all things that will help our terrestrial efforts as well. Yeah, and the excitement and the drive around space really helps kickstart a lot of the efforts for our terrestrial applications. And we also get the added benefits of bringing in people who have no background in mining whatsoever. And you get completely different views on how things should be done and how you approach problems and how you automate systems. And it's a win for everyone by working together and helping solve the future's problems and helping solve the problems we have right now.
I was just going to say our university is having a short course on it next semester, like a 4-day course where global experts are going to be involved. And, if I was a student, I would jump at following that course. And I can see people's eyes light up when they're talking about it. Now, if I said we were having a short course on, I don't know, even sustainable mining, maybe people wouldn't be just as excited. But everybody can appreciate looking up at this beautiful Australian star, what we see at night and dreaming and thinking that one day we're going to be exploring. And so if there's things we can translate and learn from one another to be more sustainable on Earth and teach us how to do things sustainably, as Tom pointed out, you won't have the water in space. Energy is an issue. All the issues we're dealing with here, it's a win-win situation, and especially having the Australian Space Agency right next to the university, it's really
beautiful synergy.
Yeah, it's really cool to be able to link up the two sectors.
Absolutely. Tom, you began your studies in nanotechnology, is that right? Yeah, right. Did you ever think that your engineering background would lead you to space exploration?
Not to space exploration, no. Even sort of 5 or 6 years ago, space mining and space resources was still very much science fiction. It's only in the last few years that it's really become something that is actually going to happen. I'm not sure people realise, but we're very, very likely to have water mined from the moon to support lunar operations within the next decade. So space mining is definitely going to happen, and it's much closer than we think. It's not something that I ever thought that I would end up in or having any involvement in, and it's very, very exciting.
Yeah. And Michael, as an environmental engineer, did you ever think you'd be advocating for mining processes?
Well, I advocate for sustainable mining processes, and I think as an environmental engineer, it's my job to do as best as I can to enable prosperity on Earth. And I'm not talking about economic prosperity. I'm talking about the type of prosperity, well-stand, if we call it, that we all kind of enjoy. To have that expectation to flourish to other countries and to ensure our own children and our grandchildren and further generations can enjoy what we enjoy in a sustainable and responsible manner. And I guess moving to Australia and before in Denmark, what I was seeing that with the growth of our population, we need more materials, and those have to be mined. So the impact can be enormous. And if we get it right, and Australia can help be that beacon of sustainability that can help others mine more sustainably around the world, what a great thing that is for all of us then.
Well, Tom and Michael, thank you so much for your time today. It's so important to be asking these big questions amongst such an incredibly relevant and important topic. So thank you for your time on the Discovery Pod today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Discovery Pod, brought to you by the University of Adelaide. Join us next time when we discuss space research.